Well, good evening to all of you. It is morning time for me, actually quite early. I am right now living in Atlanta, United States. Um, I never get used to talking to a screen. I sure wish I could see all your beautiful faces, to watch your facial expressions, your reactions, your smile, and your frowns. But for such a time as this, we'll be happy with whatever means we can have to communicate. So, my topic for you today and for us to discuss is God in ancient China. This is my family. A clearer picture has already been shared because I notice, especially the Chinese audiences, they like to grab the screens. And so, after a while, I decided I better not show a completely clear picture of my children and grandchildren. My daughter, especially, doesn't like it. Okay, has already been said, my ministry in China and in the Middle East has been through international schools. And my space of ministry is really in the marketplace. This is where I thrive. This is where I enjoy leading businessmen and women, athletes, government officials to Christ over the years. But I'm a fourth generation Singaporean Chinese. Maybe some of you have the same experience. My great grandmother took my grandfather to Singapore, and so my father and I were both born in Singapore. And I come from a very large family. I have 4 brothers and 5 sisters, 50 cousins, and they're all traditional Chinese. I became a Christian when I was 19, when I was in NS. And at that time, I thought I left the Chinese culture. At least that was how I was made to feel. And I accepted that. I accepted that, this is a price to pay for having a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. But then after I moved to China, especially the time I was in Beijing, I started to make discoveries. And the long story short is the result of this book called Faith of Our Fathers, Finding God in Ancient China. It took me 7 years to research and to write. So my position has changed from when I first became a Christian. I discovered that becoming a Christian makes me more Chinese than not. In the past, I was told, like Patrick said, uh, accepted the Yangjiao, a foreign religion. But I realized that no, ancient Chinese believe in the same God of the Bible. And that when I become a Christian, I completed that journey. Now, I want to say here up front, I am not sharing, and some people misunderstand me, that the ancient Chinese were saved. We all know that salvation is only found in Jesus Christ. But God does give us humans signposts to lead us to Jesus. And that's what I found. And Romans chapter 1, 18 to 20 confirms that for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God make it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Paul wrote Romans to the church in Rome that were both Jews and Gentile believers. And he, in this instance, is referring to the Gentiles, and he makes it very clear that even the Gentiles who do not have the word of God, the Old Testament, have no excuse. And it is because God has placed these signposts in nature so that his invisible attributes can be seen. Now, this is confirmed by what I discovered in my journey, and I will share those later. So my thesis, my conclusion is that ancient Chinese once worshipped a personal and relational God who rules lovingly and justly through his regent, that is the emperor. They also believe and practice vicarious sacrifice to maintain their relationship to this personal God. This thesis, the two main points, I will share this time, and then the next session I will share three other points. But these are the two main points that I want to share. First is that there are documents to support the ancient Chinese knew about this personal and relational God, and they also practice a sacrificial system to renew that relationship with him year after year for a few thousand years. My argument is based on, actually, I have 7 points in my book, but in interest of time, I will only share 5 during these 2 sessions. Like I said, today I will share the knowledge of God found in Chinese classics, and then the annual imperial sacrificial system. We'll take a break in between, so I will share the first one, maybe for about half an hour or so, and then we will have interaction. I believe that is the beauty and the advantage of having a Zoom meeting. We are a small group, so I would like to interact with you. So prepare your questions, because after every point, I will give us enough time to discuss. And then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back for the second part, the annual imperial sacrificial system. And during the second session, I will share about ideologies embedded in Chinese character. The Chinese writing system, it's unique in the world today. All ancient writings were phonetics. Sorry, iconic. But through time, they evolved into phonetic, such as the Roman alphabet, the Latin alphabet that we use today. And then records and interpretations of extra events, and then magi, wise men from the West. These are my experts who will come and testify for us. Publishing this book, the whole journey itself is actually a miracle. I do not know if you understand the import of this, that this book, full of scripture, I even have a pray with me at the end, was officially published in China in 2005, first in Chinese, and then in 2006 in English. The authorities were really mad about that. That's another long story, but I have a wonderful team of workers who helped make that come to pass. And I wrote this book thinking that it would be for the intellectuals. But would you believe that the first group of people who come to faith as a result of this book were the printers? We found a wonderful printer. I wanted the book to be very colorful and nice. And the owner of the print shop really liked the book. And she told the workers that she doesn't want to see any mistake. All right. She wants the book to be just right. So these workers, they are all migrant workers. They come from different villages in China, about 30 plus of them. And they would be poring over the pages to scrutinize them. And it's a 4-color printing process. So I saw them crawling over and reading the pages, and they got intrigued. They love it. And some of them read it a few times because it's a 4-color printing. The result is many of them became Christian, and a house church was formed in this print shop. Now, as I go further, I know there are objections. I have heard enough objections. And a lot of these are biases. And they basically say, Chan Kei, you're making it up. It's like looking at the clouds, you're cherry picking this and that. I want to share with you 2 illustrations to explain why I consider these biases. You see, this is the famous ketchup, right? If you go to fast food places and have French fries, you have ketchup. Now, I do not know you, so I cannot even see your faces, but maybe some of you are Cantonese out there, some are not. But do you know that the English word ketchup, it's a Chinese word? Now, if you're not a Cantonese, you wouldn't know, right? I mean, if you speak Mandarin, I do not know the Hokkien word for it, but anyway, in Chinese Mandarin is 切枝, okay? Um, it has no semblance to the English, but actually it is from the Cantonese word Kei Thong. The sorry, the Portuguese traders in Macau uh, enjoyed this sauce, brought it back to Europe, and then it passed on to England and became popular. So this is one example, and these are the second one is this store, you all know it, Watson's. Now, what is a Chinese name for it? Now, if you pronounce it in Mandarin, it's Qi Chen Si. What's the relationship between the two? Absolutely far apart. You know, Watson's and Qi Chen Si doesn't make sense. But if you know Cantonese, this is a wonderful transliteration because in Cantonese it's pronounced as Wat San Si. My point here is this. When people object to me, most of the time, they are from three groups of people. The first group, they do not know Chinese history and culture, and they do not know the Bible. So there's no way for them to accept. Second group, they are the Christians. They know the Bible and they believe the word of God is true, and so do I, but they objected the idea that ancient Chinese can have any inkling of the creator God. And that's because they do not know Chinese history and classics. So they objected just because they are, sorry to say, ignorant. But there is also the other group, and these are more probably the people that you want to reach out to, the Chinese group that may know some Chinese history and classics. And honestly, nowadays, very, very few know. I just one quick example. I went to the Xinhua Shudian in Beijing to buy Li Ji, which I will talk about later today. This is like the Chinese equivalent of the book of Leviticus. It describes the sacrificial system. I asked the lady, where can I find a book? Where can I find Li Ji? She looked up at me. She said, who is the author? I said, Confucius. Her face was red. I mean, this is supposed to be a classic. Every Chinese should know, but she doesn't. And she works in the largest bookstore in Beijing. So the ignorance out there cause people to question. And I hope that through this, I can educate some. Now, putting it in perspective, when you think about Chinese history and culture, you probably think of Confucius as the beginning of Chinese culture and civilization, but you would be wrong because Confucius only came in at halftime. Before Confucius, there was already, you look at this timeline, I'm not going to go through the details, but you'll see that there was 2,000 years of Chinese history and records before Confucius even came on the scene. And then another 2,000 plus years to us now. So what I am sharing with you, do pay attention, comes at the beginning of the Chinese civilization. I believe the knowledge of God is brought over after the dispersion at the Tower of Babel. And notice that when we talk about Yang Jiao, foreign religion, Buddhism only came into China 68 AD and only flourished during the Tang Dynasty in the 400s. And of course, the result is the Tang Dynasty become Huang Tang, debauchery. Okay. All right. First of all, I want to talk about what the ancient Chinese wrote about this God, the supreme God. These are documents, all right? These are not hearsays. These are Chinese classics, all right? It has been accepted as authority for thousands of years. Ancient Chinese had to memorize this in order to get a job. And inside these Chinese classics, there are two terms used for the supreme God. The first comes from the word Da, all right? And it's called Tian. and I'm sure most of you can read this word, Tian. Tian is one greater than great. All right, you see one stroke above Da. So this is the supreme being. Now, nowadays, when we talk about Tian, we refer mostly to the sky. All right. But just like in English, heaven can mean the sky, but also can mean God. And I want to say that I discovered that the ancient Chinese mostly refer to Tian as the personal God. All right, you can see Confucius wrote in the Analects, he who offends heaven has none to whom he can pray. So obviously he's not talking about the sky, he's talking about a person that is a supreme being. And then you can offend him and you can pray to him. Now, interestingly, if you go to the first book of Samuel, chapter 2, Eli told his two sons the same thing. You know, if you offend against man, you may have recourse, but you offend against heaven, good luck. And this is another famous saying of Confucius. All right, he is reviewing his life. And the key part I want you to pay attention to is he said, at 50, I knew the mandate of heaven. 50而知天命. Now, if Confucius is talking about the sky, meaning the natural phenomenon, he wouldn't be a very smart man, right? I mean, children at school age already started to master natural laws and principles. But here he's talking about a very important concept. And I may go back to this later. It's called the mandate of heaven, 天命. This is, in my opinion, a very ingenious concept, if you want to call it concept, that renewed the Chinese civilization generation after generation. As you probably know, the Chinese civilization, along with the Hebrew civilization, are the two longest surviving civilizations in the world. All the others have gone by the wayside, except for the Chinese and the Hebrews. And the Chinese, and of course the Hebrews we know is the hand of God. And of course, there are many other things. But here, for the Chinese, it is this concept of mandate of heaven, because this mandate is a will of God, and it becomes the governing factor in the Chinese society. And therefore, when the emperor does not exhibit the character of God, the people can rise up and overthrow him. We talk about more about this afterwards when I'm going to talk about revolution. But anyway, so you see here, Confucius is not talking about fate, right? 命运. He's not talking about natural phenomenon. He's talking about a will of God. And that makes sense. 50 years old, and he started to understand the will of God. And the other term that is even more honorific is 上帝. Now, most people nowadays, most Chinese nowadays, when they hear the word 上帝, they think about the Christian God, all right? 神, okay, generic, but 上帝 automatically means the Christian God, right? But actually, this is a generic Chinese term. It was not brought in by Western missionaries. Modern Chinese don't understand that. They thought that 上帝 is an imported term. I can tell you stories about that, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to share with you. This term is very unique. First of all, the word 帝. Did you notice that in most, not most, but many languages, the divine, all right, has this morpheme, such as divine, divinity. Now, 上帝 pronounced in Hokkien would be 上帝. So anyway, some people think that this is similar to El Shaddai. But this very interesting term has lots of meaning. And this is clarified for us. Those two terms, Tian and Shangdi, is actually clarified by a Han Dynasty historian, Zheng Xuan. He said Shangdi is another name for heaven. The spirits do not have two lords. Interestingly, you see the word Shen, all right? Nowadays, we use it for God, which is also true. In the ancient time, it refers to spirits. So Shen can be the capital G, God, or the small g, all right? So here, Zhen Xuan clarifies the issues for us. He's simply saying that Shangdi has two names, either Shangdi or Tian. Now that is not unique, right? In our Christian faith, we know God as Jehovah or Yahweh. We know him as El Shaddai. We know him as Elohim. We know him as Jesus, Emmanuel. Different names emphasize different attributes of God. They're not different gods. I have researched and I found that in the 19th century, there are sinologists. These are really dedicated researchers and experts. And I will just briefly share two with you. One is Malthus. His conclusion is, in no case do we find Shangdi exhibited under any figurative representations. Indeed, we are warned against confounding him with the images in the temples while the supreme ruler is declared again and again to be distinct from the visible heavens. The main idea attached to Shangdi is universal supremacy, uncontrollable power, justice, glory, majesty, and dominion. And then another fellow, his name is James Lake. Now, if you're interested in studying Chinese classics using English translation, you will come across his name. He was considered the foremost sinologist in the world, even by Chinese themselves, that he completely mastered the Chinese classics. He spent 25 years to translate all the Chinese classics with very good annotations, all right? A man of great scholarship. He was engaged in a heated debate over whether the Chinese knew God, all right? The same topic that we have today. There were some who absolutely refused, missionaries, foreign missionaries, who said, no, the Chinese could not have known about God. And they refused to use the term Shangdi, so they use the word Shen. And if you're familiar with Chinese Bible, there are two versions. One is the Shen version, and the other one is the Shangdi version. And the Shen version, you will see a space. All right, there's a blank space before Shen. A lot of people think that that is a way to honor God, leave a space. Actually, it was a very practical issue. Because of this great debate, there are people who use one version, the other group will use the other version. So what did the printers do? They couldn't reset everything for the two versions. So they just use one main typeset. And then for the Shen, they just have the additional space. But anyway, James Lake was very involved in that. And he has written a masterpiece, and that has actually influenced me. But this is the gist of it. But the Chinese stand out distinctly from all other heathen nations in these 2 points, that their representations of Shangdi are consistent throughout, and that they never raise any other being to an approximation to him. He is always the same, the creator and sovereign ruler, holy and just and good. And no other is ever made equal or second to him. He has no rival. All right, so the ancient Chinese, their understanding of Tian and Shangdi are fully described in the classics, and I'm going to go through them very quickly with you. In no place did the ancient Chinese make an idol of Shangdi, all right? Now, there are some cults that will have this Tian Shen and all that, but never the image of God. And in the second half of today, I will share with you some of those. Anyway, what did I discover? All right, and I want to go through this very briefly. If you study systematic theology, if you go to seminary, you will certainly take a course called systematic theology. Basically, it's a study of God, all right? What are his attributes? And these are the attributes that you will learn in your seminary. You'll find that God is sovereign. Now, I have the The references here, I don't have time to read them. If you're interested, all these are well documented in my book with the references. So God is sovereign. God is eternal. Now I'm talking about in the Chinese classics. They talk about Shangti is eternal and immutable. He doesn't change. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. He's ever present. He's infinite. He is love. Now, this is a very unique concept. All right. I talked about the mandate just now. The mandate of heaven is actually founded on this, that the ancient Chinese believe that God loves them and will assign a regent, the emperor, to rule them according to his will. Now, when the ruler does not exhibit the attributes of God, the grace, the mercy, the justice, the righteousness, the people have the right to overturn the dynasty because they say, no, this guy is not from God. Because God has first overturned him, and then they can rise up. So if you're familiar with Chinese, you know the term revolution is 革命. Now, most people do not know what does that mean, 革命. It's actually explained in the Chinese classics. 革命, it's 改革天命, it's a change of mandate. So the mandate is first changed in heaven, and then the people are empowered to apply that on earth. You notice that revolution did not start in the Western world until the Reformation. All right. And that is also based on the same idea that people can revolt and overthrow the rulers. They never did that in the medieval time, but only after the Reformation they started that, because then they believe that they are empowered by God to act on behalf of God. So in the Chinese term is 替天行道. All right. But this is all based on the idea that God loves them and God will provide the ruler that will rule them well. In modern Chinese religion, it's transactional, right? I actually, when I was 4 years old, I remember clearly actually at that time that I was a younger son, so my parents would bring me to the temple and to worship and to go to the deepest recess of the temple, and you know it's ugly and dark and dirty, and I have to put my hand in the pocket of the Cai Shen Ye to get numbers so that my parents can buy Ki, the lottery. And then I was, even in my small mind, I thought, these gods are so foolish. You give them a bit of oranges and a bit of sweets, they have to return you thousands of dollars. It's a very poor transaction. But anyway, idolatry is transactional. But the relationship with God that we have in Jesus Christ and the ancient Chinese is based on love. All right? Mozi, you may have studied him, famous ancient Chinese philosopher. How do we know that heaven loves the people of the world? Here he's particularly talking about of China, really. He said, because he enlightens them universally. In other words, God gives people wisdom and ability to think because he loves them. Okay, God is holy, all right? And I don't need to explain this one. And God is gracious. It's a very important character of the emperor that he must exhibit grace. That's why you have 隆恩浩大, all right? He must be able to pardon people when it is the right thing to do. And then God is faithful. Okay, we'll move to the second point. The first, we discovered the ancient Chinese documents that describe this supreme being and their relationship with him. There is now another evidence refers to the ancient Chinese sacrificial system. This is the most continuous religious practice in China. It had lasted for a few thousand years. It only stopped once again, like the classics, when China became a republic. But no dynasty had ever failed to continue this sacrificial system, and it's officially called the border sacrifice, 交祭. Why border? Because it has to be performed outside the city, and particularly on the eastern side, similar to the Hebrew practice. The sacrifice has to be performed outside. That's why Jesus was crucified outside Jerusalem. And this is the most continuous religious practice, just like we were discussing early on. This sacrifice appeared as soon as there is Chinese history. There is not a point that says, oh, they started to do this. So early on, Patrick talked about Da Yu, the founder of the Xia dynasty. The record says that in ancient times, the Son of Heaven of the Xia dynasty personally and reverentially sacrificed to Shangdi at the border. That is why it's called the border sacrifice. So the Chinese history recorded that and explained why it is called the border sacrifice. And because the Chinese capital has been moved from place to place, so there are a few archaeological sites, such as this one, found near Xi'an, which was a major capital in ancient times. And the purpose of this sacrifice is well explained. First of all, this sacrifice, it's deemed that men serve Shangdi. In other words, this is where men worship God. Now, even more important than that, it is explained to an emperor. The most important thing is to follow the principles of heaven. In following heaven, nothing is more important than the border sacrifice. So this is the most important thing that an emperor has to do. And then it is further explained in the Book of Rites. This is the Li Ji I talked about. It says to honor the rites is to honor the meaning intended in it. If the meaning is lost, then the sacrifices are simply presented as a national celebration. So the requirements can be fulfilled, but its meaning is not easily understood. The emperor who understands the meaning and practices it, he will be able to rule the nation. So the thing here is this: the sacrifice is not an end in itself, and it clearly says that there is an embedded meaning, and this meaning is not easily understood, but that if the emperor understands it, then he will be able to rule the nation. Wow, think about that. This is the key. This is the key to ruling China, a large population. So what is that meaning? I asked this question to the director of the Temple of Heaven, a lady that I got to become friend with, and she actually said she doesn't know, but she knew this passage. I said, well, this passage says that there is a meaning to it. So what is that meaning? She doesn't know, but I believe that some ancient Chinese knew. There's a story, and this is a historical record. The first dynasty was Xia dynasty, and then the second dynasty was Shang dynasty. This is where we get the Chinese term for doing business, because it was the Shang people that introduced trading, Shangren. So this dynasty was founded by a guy called Shang Tang, and in Chinese history, he is considered the first revolutionary, not Mao Zedong, because he revolted and overturned the Shang dynasty, and he did that actually very reluctantly. He wrote about it, but he said he was led by God to take over the mandate because the Xia dynasty has become too corrupt. Very similar to the story of David taking over the mandate from King Saul. But during his reign, actually the famine started before his revolution, and then it continued. There was this 7-year famine, and the people were dying. All right, Shang Tang, the new emperor, reigned over a period initially of devastation. Um, People were dying. And so the ministers suggested that they should do something drastic. They have done everything, they have offered all kinds of sacrifices, and it seemed like Shang-Ti is not listening. So some guy suggested to him that perhaps they should do a human sacrifice. Now, there were human sacrifice in Chinese history, but it was not systematic. It was never condoned. It was never seen as the right thing to do. Interestingly, Shang Tang accepted. He says, okay, yeah, we shall do this. The situation is so dire and we should do that. So they set up a place and a time. And to everyone's surprise, when they showed up to come and observe the ceremony, and Shang Tang told them he would take care of everything, he had actually prepared himself. He had cut his hair, trimmed his nails, bathed himself, washed up, and he was going to be sacrificed like Isaac, and he was going to sacrifice himself. And then he made a prayer, and this is recorded in Li Shi Chunqiu. All right, this chronicle is produced by the godfather of Qin Shi Huang. It said that at this place, at the mulberry bush, Shang Tang prayed this prayer. I have sinned. The people have no part in it. If, however, the people have sinned, the offenses must also rest upon me. Please do not let one person's lack of virtue cause Shang-Ti and the spirits to destroy the lives of the people. So you see the Chinese term here, spirit is 鬼神, all right? 鬼 are the evil spirits and Shen are the good spirits, just like our angels. So they understood there is a spiritual world. But the most important point about this prayer is that Shang Tang understood vicarious sacrifice. Now, this is uniquely a Christian concept that one person can die on behalf of all the people. Now, this is a very powerful understanding. And this is the embedded meaning in the sacrifice. Just like the Old Testament animal sacrifice, which is explained in the book of Hebrews, were not meant to remove the sins of the people. They could not. The bloods of the animals, like the writer of Hebrews say, cannot remove our sins. But it was a preview of the true sacrifice to come. So I believe that some ancient Chinese understood that there would come a time when there would be a perfect sacrifice that could take away our sin and redeem the world. And this sacrifice has it's very well documented. We have artifacts dating back from the earliest dynasties, from the Wudi, the Zhou, and the Qin Han, Tang Song. Every dynasty, this is carried on, and like this author at Xi'an, so we know that no dynasty has ever failed. The one that most people are familiar with, the place, the Temple of Heaven, it's the one in Beijing, of course. It was first built in 1420. Now, first thing, it's called the Temple of Heaven, which is a mistranslation. The Chinese word is Tian Tan, not Tian Miao. A temple is Miao, but Tan is an altar. So the ancient Chinese never referred to this as a temple because there is no idol. In the Chinese explanation, Miao comes from Mao, image, Mian Mao, the Mao. So a Miao, and this is explained in Chinese classics, it's a place where you put idols. But there is no idol. This is how I got clued into all this. I actually, when I first moved to Beijing, hated to go to the Temple of Heaven. I had this concept, this is like those Chinese temples I was familiar with. And I would take people to the Summer Palace, a Forbidden City. And then when they say, go to the Temple of Heaven, I say, oh. But I went because, I had to entertain them. And then it was there that I discovered there are no idols. That really led me to start this journey. But this place was, it still is, the largest altar dedicated to the one true God. That's the worship of the one true God. It was built in 1420 when the usurper Yongle, the Ming emperor, he killed his nephew and became the new emperor. And because his power base was in the north, so he moved his capital from Nanjing back to Beijing. Um, the Ming started their capital in Nanjing. So it took many years. He actually hardly used this place. He died shortly after Beijing was established. But this place is 3 times bigger than Imperial Palace, and that it is recorded that he used the better workmen and the best material for the Temple of Heaven over the Forbidden City. All right. He had to build both of them at the same time, and he used the better workmen and materials for it. This is a layout plan. It's a fascinating place. If you go to Beijing, I would encourage you to read my book and go and enjoy it. All right, a few things that it's a very, what shall I say, a very complex sacrifice, but it's very well documented. And somebody asked just now about the Qing dynasty. This is one thing, that when one dynasty takes over, usually they will get rid of all but some of the officials. Sometimes they are sent away and sometimes they are killed. But there's one group of people who will always be spared. And these are the ones that know the sacrifice. So you are quite safe if you work in this area, because the new dynasty will want to do it right. And the way they want to do it right is by having the people who knows how to do it. So 6 days before this sacrifice, the emperor will make a proclamation. This proclamation is to the people, but also to the spirits. Notice that when he refers to himself, he uses a superlative I. Okay, Zhen. Zhen is the honorific title reserved only for the emperor. Only the emperor refers to himself as Zhen. Right? So you can see here in a proclamation, the emperor sees himself superior, of course, to his subjects, but also to the spirits. And this is the original Chinese. These are all recorded, right? And that's the Ming Dynasty. That's the Ming statutes. So winter solstice, it's the 21st, the night between 21st and 22nd December. It is the shortest day of the year. Now in Singapore, we don't have the seasons. We're not very familiar, except that you will, maybe in your younger days, your parents will make the tanwan, you know, the what do you call that? The ball soup, the 冬至. It's the most auspicious day in the year in the Chinese calendar, because the shortest day of the year happens on that day. And then from then on, the days will get longer. So the Chinese consider that the beginning of the young period of the year. So it is on this day, 6 days before the winter solstice, the emperor would make the proclamation. And on the day before, the emperor and his entourage, usually a few thousand in numbers, all his ministers. Now, women were not allowed. There was only one woman who ever was part of this sacrifice throughout Chinese history. Anybody has any guess? Since you cannot respond now, I respond now. I'll tell you, is Wu Zetian, okay, the first and only female emperor of China. She was the only one, only woman that had participated in this sacrifice. But the officials would participate in this, and they have to fast. I will talk about that afterwards. And they have to, at about 10 a.m., the day before winter solstice, they will arrive in the western gate of the Temple of Heaven. This gate is called the Zhaohen Gate. And this entourage, this painting of Qianlong's entourage, he would be in this sedan here on the lower right side. A few thousand, And what you see here, this painting, it's surrounding the one of the rooms in the Forbidden City. This is 1/10 of the entire painting. I couldn't put them all here, but I have a copy of the whole scroll. Then he would get to this place called the fasting hall. He would change out of his emperor's clothing, and then he would bathe himself and prepare himself, and he's here to pray and fast. He would fast from three things. He would fast from meat, he would fast from women, and he would also fast from doing business. Now, all the people that were part of that service had to do the same. So it was said that the ministers in those few days would not go home to sleep because they were afraid that people would accuse them of having a relationship with their wives or with concubines or with any women. That would be very serious business. The emperor cannot allow anyone to mess up. This is a very serious fast. And then they will also wear on their like a, what do you call that, like a tag, all right, that says I'm fasting. So during that time, nobody is supposed to talk to them about business. You know, sometimes when we go to church, maybe we should practice that. I'm fasting. I'm in worship. Don't bother me. All right. This is the fasting hall. You notice there is a moat. Because now there's no water, they planted grass on it. That's because the emperor had to spend the night there, all right, for protection. They would have this surrounded by a moat. Now, Yongzheng was not a popular emperor, and people suggested that he usurped the throne. Yongzheng never slept here. He just would go back. But all the other emperors would spend the night here in preparation for the ceremony. And inside, just outside this prayer hall, you see a pavilion. And those few days when he was there, this statue would be placed there. And there's a story to that. This is not an idol. This is actually a reminder. It was said that at one time, an emperor was not doing the right thing. He was fooling around, in other words. He was really not fasting and praying. So a minister confronted him. And so from then on, they put this statue, and you see his hand like this. Actually, they would have a tablet. The tablet is a reminder that now is the time to meditate, to pray, and to fast. Then after he has changed into his priestly robe, the religious robe, he will come to this place called the Imperial Vault, Huang Chongyu. Now, if you have been to the Temple of Heaven, this place is most famous for the resounding wall, Hui Yin Bi, right? If you stand at the right place, you can play Chinese telephone. You know, you can stand one, and the sound would just travel around. But usually, when there are lots of people there, you cannot test it out. To test all this, you must go there in the winter where there are very few people. Okay, he will show up here. This is a place where the tablet for Shangdi would be put. Early on, I told you about the two gentlemen. It was here. I was standing here. They were standing next to me. They were trying to strain their eyes to decipher what was on the tablet. All right, this is where the emperor will come and basically pray and give an account and tell God that he's ready. He's ready to worship him. Everything is prepared. So he will prostrate himself, all right, in front of this tablet. And you notice there are no idols, not here nor anywhere. So this is certainly not idolatry. This is where he keeps this holy tablet for the name of God. And what does it say? It says Huang Tian Shang Di. On the right, you see the Hanzi. And on the left, you have the Manchurian script because the Qing dynasty was Manchurian. So I would assume that before the Qing dynasty, you wouldn't see the Manchurian script. But this term is the highest honor for the creator God. Huang Tian, Huang means August, huge. Tian will be explained, and Shang means above, is the Lord above. So the emperor would prostrate himself and tell God he's ready. Now, you are probably more familiar with this bigger structure. Now, this is actually called the Qinian Dian. This is a place, he would come here in the springtime to worship and to pray for a good harvest. And these are all magnificent structure. They are built without nails, all right? There's no hammering or things like that to be heard. The design is superb, all right? There is no finer Chinese architecture than what you see here. And this is all built by the Ming Emperor Yongle after many years. You see the inside, it is so magnificent and ornate, all right? Like I said, it is much better than the Forbidden City. So it shows you his priority, who he considered to be more important. And then you will see the sacrificial animal, all right? These are the animals, and they are prescribed, all right? The book of Li Ji explained that this got to be special animal. So the Chinese word is te, shen. Now, some of you who understand Chinese will know te means special. But originally, the word te means this kind of sacrificial animal. It is a special kind. They few months before the sacrifice, the emperor would send out usually his most trusted brother or minister to scour the land to look for pure color animals, and has to be without blemish. Even the size of the horn has to be up to specification. It's very precise, all right? And every dynasty would choose one color, and the Qing dynasty, as you can see here, chose white, all right? All the animals for the sacrifice have to be albino white. And so this goes, it's similar to the Old Testament and the New Testament. Of course, we understand the book of Hebrews explain that because this is a preview for the sacrifice to be performed by Jesus, that only a perfect animal, a perfect sacrifice is accepted by God. Music was a very important part of it. Now, I mentioned to you about Qin Shi Huang destroying the books, and this was majority of this. Confucius, who heard the music, said that for 3 days he did not need to eat. So this music must be wonderful. But unfortunately, we do not have the music. We have the words, but the music is lost to us, mostly because Confucius destroyed them. But during the time of Qianlong, of the Qing dynasty, it is recorded that he had 2,000 musicians living in this conservatory. Now, most people who go to the Temple of Heaven today do not know that there is this conservatory, which is to the, let me think, okay, to the west of the complex. So if you go, make sure you go to this place. And it's important to note also that these musicians were dedicated, set apart for this. It is said that these musicians were never used to entertain the emperor. Sometimes you see movies and they bring these musicians out. That's not right, because it is recorded that these musicians serve only Shangdi. So they never allow them or allow themselves to entertain other people. It has been restored, this by my friend, who was the director at that time. She's no longer there. She's now the director of the Beijing Museum. But magnificent musical instruments. And I was able to perform a Chinese Christian music festival there. And this is my friend Timothy Su, a Christian conductor, and we had a wonderful time. But you see here that it is a tradition that at the end of every sacred music performance, they would use a brush to brush different colored cards. They are of different heights on top of this creature. This creature is supposed to represent the earth. And these cards represents different people, the inequality. The whole idea is that this worship of Shangdi will bring about peace and harmony. So the brush is to signify that all the injustices will be brushed away. But the most important event, of course, is the sacrifice itself. It will be performed on this circular mound. Chinese term is yuanqiu, like a cake. It has 3 tear and 9 steps to every tear. So you have to walk 9 steps to the next flight. The sacrifice will be performed at 9 quarters before sunrise. So it will be around 4:15 a.m. on December 22nd. Now, I live in Beijing, so I tell you that 4:15 a.m. in this, at that time, considered the suburb of Beijing, outside the city, will be very cold. All right, it can get as low as 35, minus 35 degrees Celsius. But this is serious business. All right, the emperor would come here. At midnight, the place would be lit up, and about 4:15, the emperor would already be here ready for a 9-part ceremony. Everything has to be 9, all right, to signify eternity, 长长久久, all right, 9, 9. I told you about the coldness. The Ming emperor actually do not wear shoes when they perform the sacrifice. It's recorded. All right, this is the plan of this place. There is a stone here called the Tong Tian Shi. All right, this is a stone to heaven. This is where the emperor, position number 5, is where the emperor would stand throughout the ceremony. And position number 1 is the tablet, where we saw early on from the imperial vault would have been moved and placed here. And then these are various other items. There's only one other person with the emperor on the tear, and that is the master of ceremony. Everybody else has to be below. His sons will be here, this 18, 19, 20. And then all the few thousand people will be on the south of him. So even in this, you will see that the idea that the emperor now assumes the role of the mediator between God and man. God and then man behind. Now, there are other tablets here. This was a stumbling block to the Roman Catholics. I will talk about the Jesuits the next time, but the Jesuits discovered this, and actually the Jesuits participated in this ceremony because the Jesuits were raised to the highest ranks in the Qing dynasty. These other tablets contain names of the ancestors. So when Vatican heard about it, they were furious and they say this is syncretism. And so they had a debate, but Emperor Kangxi, considered one of the best emperors in all of Chinese history, he reigned for about 50 years. He explained, no, he says, I do not worship my ancestors here. I bring them along to the worship. They are not the object of my worship. I only worship Shangdi. There you go here. So you have the emperor's own words. This is recorded, all right? And I believe it is still in the Vatican's archives, that the emperor explained that he doesn't worship his ancestors. He has their tablet for remembrance, but also he brought them along. He believed their spirits are around, and that they should come and join in the worship. Now, the emperor doesn't stand here I said early on he's standing. No, actually he's in position 17. 9 times he would ascend to the top tier to position number 5 for every part. And then every time he goes up there, he will perform the highest form of homage, the San Bai Jiu Kou. That means he will prostrate himself 3 times. Every time he will kowtow 3 times. So in other words, 9 times 3 times 3 he would have to kowtow, he would have to prostrate, um, kowtow 81 times, in other words. Um, so you can see that this is a very serious business, and it's the highest form of humility and honor performed by the most powerful person that ruled the largest empire in the world at that time. And so this is a stone I referred to. It's called Tong Tian Shi. This is where the emperor would stand, and the tablet would be somewhere here towards the north here. Now, if you are there again without people, you will find, you will experience the amazing acoustic created by the architect. All right, I like to demonstrate to my guests. I usually bring them there at the end of the day, or especially at winter when there are fewer people, like a day like this. You'll be able to experience the echo, all right, the sound that is amplified. So the emperor, of course, without amplifiers, had to pray, had to read out his prayer aloud. And so that is amplified for everybody to hear. Marvelous architecture. All right. Every part has a prayer song. Um, it is actually very interesting to study these prayers. They are very similar to the book of Psalms we have in the Bible. So the first one, when he welcomes Shangdi to his presence, he talks about creation. All right. Of in the beginning there was the great chaos without form and almost like the book of Genesis. All right. So I do not find any syncretism. I do not find anything that is theologically unsound about their understanding of God. Now, every piece of this is uh, had music to it, but we don't have the music. We have the words. This were sung and performed. So it's like a worship service. Now, early on during the proclamation, remember I referred to early on, 6 days before, he will proclaim to the spiritual world and to his people, and he used the word 正, superlative I. But now when he's speaking to God, you see this song, the Yuan He song, he calls himself 臣, servant. So it's very clear. The emperor sees himself superior to the spirit, but subjected to Shangdi. The priority is very clear. And early on, I told you about the father-child relationship. You see that here in this song. This is the second part of it. His offering of gems and silk. He calls God his father, and he calls himself God's child. So this explains or expresses a personal relationship that the emperor can have with God. This is the finest form of silk called yubo, and this is what they will use for the sacrifice. For the wine, later we'll talk about, they will use pure water. They actually do not use alcoholic drink. So anyway, the third part would be the offering of the animal. This is the sacrifice. And once again, you see, he calls himself Chen. All right, and then the fourth part, the offering of wine. They believe that they have they will use sort of a spring water. They consider that to be holy water, the purest form, not wine. And here you see he humbles himself and he acknowledges that he is just a foolish servant. Then he will make his prayer. Now, this is where, remember at the fasting hall, this is what he had to do. This is where he will write his prayer to Shangdi. This is a one from the Ming Dynasty, Qing Dynasty, Jia Qing's prayer. So he refers to himself as a reed or willow, lowly stuff. He calls himself an ant, and then he recognizes, he acknowledges that the mandate comes from God. This is the original Chinese. And then another song, it's called Jing He, and again, you notice that he continues to acknowledge that he's just a servant of God. Now then the fifth part, this is where they were, the earlier one, he would perform the martial dance, and now they perform the silver dance. Uh, Usually, when the emperor came on the throne through military power, they will perform the military dance first. But if it was a peaceful succession, they will perform the silver dance. And here in this song, you notice that he affirms the creation. So for thousands of years, the Chinese believe that the world is created, believe in creation. And this is the reason why the creation ministry around the world engaged me. And now I am in the process of getting my book translated into Portuguese for the Brazilians, creation ministry, because we know that the ancient Chinese for a few thousand years do not have any other notion except that God created the world. And then the sixth part, which is the third presentation of wine. Once again, he recognized himself as the servant. Then the seventh, it's the remover of all the sacrifices. Here, I find this song interesting. Now we understand, we all know that the Bible described God as the potter. Even the ancient Chinese also accepted that. You notice that the emperor saw God as the potter. Why? The potter shapes and reforms us. All right, the whole idea that Jeremiah went to the potter's shop and God used that to show him, his relationship with man. So God, in the same way, is a potter in our life. He breaks us up, just like this period of pandemic. It's part of God's purpose, and He's using it to reshape us, to give us new direction and reform us, transform us. Then the eighth part is sending off. Now, again, just like Solomon understood, the emperor understood that God is too great to live amongst in buildings made by man. So in the eighth part of the ceremony, he will send God back. And then the ninth part is actually the burnt offering. Now, this sequence is also similar to the Old Testament. All right, the burnt offering had to be performed at the end of it, and Paul talks about this and explain. So you will find that this is a place. All right, this is at the end of the ceremony. The ceremony started at 4:15. 9 quarters later, at about 6 o'clock on winter solstice, the sun would about to rise. And the emperor would stand here facing east, and the animal would be burnt. All right. So you will see the smoke going up. They would use sandalwood, all right, a very fragrant wood to perform the burnt offering. You notice on the left here, there is a pit. The pit is for the parts that cannot be burnt, all right? Very similar to the Hebrew practice. And this is the part I talked about when Paul talks about we as a fragrant sacrifice. Our service comes after salvation. So similar here, this burnt offering is a reference to our service. It's after the sacrifice, but be careful because not every part of us is suitable to be used to serve God, and it is explained here. So this is probably the scene the emperor would see, and you see the cauldrons with all the gems and other sacrifices. All right, so next week I will move into words have meaning, and then the astronomical phenomena that the Chinese saw and their interpretation, and I will also talk about the Magi from the West. And these are the resources, Patrick. If you are interested, I have already sent it to you. You can pass it on to those who are interested to order the materials. I have a Word edition, and then later I work with a Japanese artist, Kelly Shinozawa, and to produce a manga version, because I noticed that many modern people do not read a 300-page book. So if you don't have the time, I will encourage you to read the manga version. It maybe take you a couple of hours to finish it. I have also other resources. This past year, I have done more than 100 hours of online teaching, mostly in Chinese. So if you have Chinese friends and relatives are interested, these are geared more towards Christians, or at least sympathetic to Christian. If they're interested in manhood, interested in home education, interested in business or servant leadership. I have a series on Philippians, and I also have a 12-part series on our spiritual identities in Christ. I have them in full length and also short clips. Some of my Chinese friends have harvested more than 1,000 short clips from 1 to 5 minutes so they can send to their friends on social media. So thank you for your attention. These are my contact information. And if you need to reach me, I welcome you to talk to me. And if I can help you, I'll be very willing to. So now we